Welcome to Boots on the Ground, your go-to source for retail, real estate, urban development, and community revitalization. Today, we're diving into a special episode with Downtown Strategies' Jenn Gregory, president of Downtown Strategies, and Jeremy Murdock, a seasoned community development specialist. Fresh off the Main Street Now conference hosted in Birmingham, Alabama, right where our headquarters are located, Jenn and Jeremy are bringing us firsthand insights, stories of vibrancy, and actionable strategies. They're going to relate the innovative ideas and successful examples discussed at the conference that can ignite economic growth and enhance community engagement in downtowns across the country. Whether you're a city planner, a local business owner, or simply a community enthusiast, this episode is packed with inspiration to transform your local Main Street into a bustling hub of activity.
So last week, we had the pleasure of attending the Main Street Now annual conference, which is Main Street America's annual conference that's held in a different city every year. This year, it was at the same location as our headquarters for Retail Strategies, and that's in Birmingham, Alabama. So our team was so excited to be able to kind of show off our hometown, but also really get to network and learn from other community leaders, other consultants, and members of think tanks and universities, and really just so many thought leaders in the downtown revitalization space. So the conference was last week. It was May 6th through the 8th in Birmingham, and we're really excited to sum it up today and tell you a little bit about what we learned.
What kind of trends did you see? What was the shape of this? Did y'all have special sessions? Did you end up talking with a lot of different people? Or were there speakers presenting? How did that work?
Yeah, so the format of the conference is a typical conference where we have multiple sessions going on at one time, different educational sessions. You probably have a dozen or more in each time slot, all throughout the day, covering a wide variety of topics. So there's a lot of different interests. You can find different topics on just about anything related to downtown revitalization. This is my third national conference to attend. This one was one of the most active. I feel like it was really well attended, and the topics were just spot on with the things that we're seeing with our clients, some of the challenges that they're seeing with activating vacant properties and dealing with property owners. How do you grow entrepreneurship? Things like that are typical things that we see in our clients. A lot of focus on creating vibrancy, whether that's through enhancing your streetscape or updating buildings and building renovations and storefront. A lot of focus, which I'm very passionate about, of focusing on small incremental changes and how those small changes can add up over time to a bigger impact. And that is right up my alley of talking about things like that and fits our philosophy as well. And then things specific to Main Street associations about how to activate your board. I mean, Main Streets are built around having a Main Street board that engages the stakeholders of downtown in the improvement of downtown. That's kind of a big part of the Main Street approach. And then this formation of committees, committee structure that follows that 4-point approach. That's just the heart of Main Street in general. And so a lot of talk about how do you activate those committees? How do you activate your board to where it's not all falling on the shoulders of that Main Street director?
Excellent. You mentioned the incremental approach, but you also mentioned this term vibrancy. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how those two can correlate with each other.
Yeah. So, and we focus a lot on this in our work as well, of how do you make downtown an exciting place to be? So something that grabs people's attention as they're driving through, as you're attracting visitors and even people working downtown. How do you entice them to explore the downtown district? And we talk a lot about vibrancy in our work as far as public art, landscaping, street trees, beautification of the buildings, renovations, things like that. So it's a wide, pretty broad topic. So a lot of the sessions I went to talked about the different types of things. So from the landscaping perspective, what are some things to improve the streetscape, from street trees to awnings to encouraging business owners to bring their merchandise out on the storefront to activate the storefront. I had a really good session with another consulting firm that we've crossed paths with before in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky region. Did a great session on activating the first 16 feet. So thinking about from the storefront out 16 feet toward the street, that's where people experience your downtown. So how can you really pay attention to the details in that area, from is it accessible? Are your sidewalks cracked and busted up to where you're creating some hazards there? To what are improvements you can make to beautify that space, to add interesting elements from potted plants to merchandise displays, signage, all those types of things. That was a really interesting session. And we really talked about incremental changes, that you don't have to have this multi-million-dollar grant that fixes everything overnight. There are things you can do starting tomorrow to improve your streetscape downtown. So that was a really good session. And even when you get into building renovations, because we encounter that a lot with our clients, of dealing with vacant properties or underutilized properties, and people get frustrated that you're dealing with a property owner and some of this is beyond your control. But some of the sessions we went to were talking about incremental changes as far as that goes, from the impact a gallon of paint can have on a storefront to how do you incrementally piece together some investor groups and things like that to deal with renovations. So even at these bigger topics like investment groups and big renovations and things, they were still trying to break it down into incremental steps toward how you can work toward those bigger issues.
Yeah. And I think, just picking up on that, one thing that really was meaningful, I think, was to hear so many community leaders. So of course, we're consultants. We love to share kind of what we know, what we've been trained to do, and what we see elsewhere. But there's really nothing like hearing it from the folks that are doing it themselves. And Jeremy and I are both former downtown practitioners ourselves. So we know what that's like to work in the trenches and to really see that this stuff doesn't sound like rocket science, but it takes a lot of work. You're dealing with a lot of people. You're dealing with so many moving pieces, like policy, like volunteers, problem property owners. And so to hear so many successes at the community level was really, inspiring, I think, to us, and also confirming in our approach that incremental is the way to do it, and that even a small win makes a big difference. I think also a lot of our clients are searching for the right way to improve their downtown. And what was a big takeaway, I think, for me, was that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all way to do most of the work that our communities are wanting to see done in their communities, and most of the work that we are recommending and that we are helping to get implemented in our client communities. For example, real estate is always a hot topic. Our communities always kind of have that albatross of a building that they want to see a life breathed into. They want to see it redeveloped. We encourage our communities to get in the driver's seat, to do something about those properties and not just wait on that one big investor that's going to come and turn it all around. And for us to really hear so many examples of communities that have done that, but in varying different ways, was great, because we serve through Downtown Strategies. We serve clients with a population of 500, and we serve clients with a population of 300,000. And so kind of that affirmation that there is no one right way to do this work. But hearing so many success stories really armed us, I think, with the knowledge and additional case studies that we are so excited to share with our clients and our future clients as well.
Yeah, and Jen, that was something that really stood out to me that I don't remember in past conferences, but it was obvious that was a point of focus for this conference from the sessions, was that almost every session included case studies. It wasn't just about the topic itself. They included examples and case studies from other communities around the country. So I thought that was a really good addition to the conference this year.
And then one of those things that I kind of think about on occasion is, what if you do have all these case studies and you have all this information, all this knowledge? I mean, it could always manifest as a master plan, but we're talking about these incremental steps. And then I think the big question is, what order do you lay those out in, right? And of course, that would, I assume, have to depend on the specific community you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think, where most communities get tripped up is, what do you do first? They leave a conference like this, or they hear this podcast where we're recapping it, and they think, yeah, I want to do that. That'll work in my community. but what do I do first? And it goes back to that same example of real estate. They're looking for the right way to do everything. And what we believe so sincerely at Downtown Strategies is that what really matters is action, doing something, taking that next step. And I'll kick it over to Jeremy to talk a little bit about kind of our approach of setting up local action teams. Because I think what was so evident at this conference, and it's something that Jeremy and I, through our each 15-year career in downtown revitalization, have seen, is that a Main Street director, a mayor, a city manager can't do it on their own. It requires a team, and it requires a lot of times a grassroots effort, passionate community members to come up to join a seat at the table and to help get these things done. So through our experience of seeing that as practitioners, we heard it over and over again at the conference as well. We really believe that community action is the way to see sustainable revitalization. So Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about our action team approach?
Sure. And we always start with trying to figure out with our client or any community we're working with, what is their next step? Because one community's next step is going to be different from another because they're all different and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So trying to find that next step is key, which goes to what Jen was talking about, the starting point for them. In order to be ultimately successful, it has to be this wider network of stakeholders to be engaged. It cannot be just the city, just the Main Street organization, just the tourism entity, whoever that lead organization is. They can't do it all by themselves. They're there to really guide efforts and work at this higher level. But if you want to be truly successful, the downtown stakeholders have to take an active role in this work. And obviously that's the Main Street approach, is really engaging those stakeholders. And so what we try to do through our approach is really put together a short-term strategic action plan for them that outlines the next steps for them in those different categories of what can you be doing in policy and administration and incentives, things like that, to really guide and spark activity in the private sector. What are things you can be doing from a design standpoint to make sure you're creating that vibrant downtown and improving the appearance and functionality of your downtown? What are you doing to promote the things you're doing and connect the dots between tourists and activity and locals and your downtown businesses? And then thinking about activating property, working with property owners and trying to attract entrepreneurs and that next generation of business owners, and trying to grow your existing businesses. How do you support them? So all these different categories we're looking in, but how do you engage a broader audience that can support the work that Main Street director, that tourism director, that chamber director, that city employee, whoever's leading downtown efforts, how can we build a team around them that can support what they're doing and enhance what they're doing? And ideally, it would be this collaborative group of people that might represent other civic groups or volunteer organizations. Maybe it's activating a existing board of some type or committee that's not as active or engaged as you want them to be, and helping them identify a short-term project that they can adopt, something that they can do in the next 6 to 8 months, something very small scale. We can get them a very quick win and a success that then they can learn how to, through that process, they're going to learn a lot of how to really manage a project, how to work with the different personalities, how to work together as a team. And they'll learn a lot through that process, as we're there to support them and hold their hand as they really take action and implement that first small scale project. And we've seen it time and time again that as they really do that, go through that process and achieve something, whether that's hosting a small scale event or doing a mural project or some sort of beautification project, that gets them some confidence as a group to be able to tackle another project, tackle something different, tackle something larger the next time. A lot of times that action team will spin off into a second one that's going to focus on something else. We've seen that in a community in Arkansas. The original group worked on just a small scale event, a reoccurring extended hours event. They were really successful at launching that in about a 2-month period. They got that up off the ground and running again. And one of the team members said, "Hey, this has been great. Love what we're doing. I'm really passionate about design and the physical appearance of our downtown." So she spun off into her second group that was going to do some like public art projects in the downtown. So now they have 2 teams that are actively working in the downtown area, in addition to what that full-time staff member was doing. So that's our goal is to create this swarm of activity where you have multiple small scale initiatives going on simultaneously. And so that example I just shared with you shows how that one team has now grown into two teams, and the more success they get, they can just continue to grow. So you have multiple initiatives going on at the same time to really create that swarm.
And I think that's what I love about downtowns in general is that it's a huge ecosystem for creativity, right? Like if we think about downtowns that we love to visit, they're all completely different. Really, there's no two that are just alike. And that's the cool part about it is that really there's so much opportunity. What do you want your downtown to be like? Okay, let's go do it, And so really just as Jeremy detailed, getting communities to take action. And I think that's what I loved hearing at the Main Street Now conference was just example after example of amazing creativity, grassroots organization, and small scale wins that add up to be something really spectacular to create a place where you want to go, you want to invest, you want to take your family, and really just that ultimate gathering place in the community that's welcoming to everyone. And I think that's what most of us want for our downtowns, and it works. We're seeing it work all across the country. And so I think our team left just really inspired about hearing the successes and looking forward to how we can continue to support our clients in a similar way.
Speaking of these examples, Jeremy just gave one. Were there any that you saw, like specific community that had something amazing happen over the last, 2 to 3 years that we can kind of point at and say, yes, it went from, zero to hero?
Yeah, I think an example that came up several times was a community in Illinois that wanted to support entrepreneurs. They had some vacancy, but a lot of times vacant buildings in downtowns are not what we call at Downtown Strategies. They weren't retail ready, right? They weren't ready for a new business concept to lease the space and open up their business. And so they were kind of at a stalemate of, how can we bring new businesses, new restaurants, new concepts downtown if our inventory isn't ready? And so they did what several other communities across the country are doing, and they created a little space with temporary sort of pop-up containers, if you will. Now, we've seen this across the country take shape with shipping containers, with sheds, with pods, storage pods. I mean, really anything you can think of. But they created this awesome little destination of these pop-up retail and restaurant spaces that you see in big urban cities a lot of times. I was in Tampa over the holidays, and they had a Christmas village that was full of these temporary pop-ups, but it's a little bit harder to do that in rural communities, which is primarily the type of communities that we serve. And so seeing this community in Illinois really just take charge and work with community partners. They had materials donated. All of the labor was in kind. So, just think of creating this retail and restaurant destination with really no cost other than a lot of time and effort. And it has grown in such a way that it's kind of branded their downtown as a destination. That helps the vacant property owners feel confident in investing a lot of, capital into their buildings to get them retail ready. So that temporary kind of short-term fix for a very complex problem has started to, unwind this big problem. It's given confidence to the private sector to do what they need to do to get their spaces retail ready. And it's really just risen the whole downtown in a way that they are seeing huge benefits from and really seeing themselves as a destination. So again, we've heard of this concept. We've recommended this concept to our clients, but to see it done on a zero budget line item was really amazing. And I think it really shows that if there's a will, there's a way. That grassroots effort is critical. And so that was a fun example to see. And we heard about it, in several sessions throughout the conference. So clearly it's kind of made its way through the industry as a best practice and as a good example. So that was one example, just no cost, really sweat equity, which is something that all communities can do. But then on the flip side, certainly there are projects that do take capital, and especially those more catalytic projects that communities are really searching for. And I think what was so interesting, Jeremy and I both sat in different sessions that touched on this a little bit, and it kind of demystified seeking a big investor. So we mentioned earlier, real estate development is kind of a big buzzword, if you will, in downtown revitalization. Everybody's looking for that savior, if you will, that investor that's going to come in and just fix everything, buy the buildings, renovate them. That does happen sometimes, but many times it's not quite that easy. So one thing that was a kind of a theme, I think, is don't just look for that one investor, but think about how you can cobble together different groups and different streams of funding for one project. And so we hear all the time about public-private partnerships. That's a key, certainly, to downtown revitalization. Jeremy and I have both, when we were practitioners, were involved in several public-private partnerships that were incredible projects and that the communities are still benefiting from today. But oftentimes we think about public as city, city, county, or state. That's that public level. But really thinking well beyond that into nonprofits, foundations, entities that have funds for very specific priorities are great partners in redevelopment projects. So I'll give a very brief example and then kick it over to Jeremy for another. I heard about a development in New Orleans. So definitely a very big metro area, but kind of a small, blighted, impoverished neighborhood of New Orleans. And their community development group had a real estate project that their sights were set on. It was an old shopping center, so a very large footprint, but the building was in complete disrepair. They convinced the property owner to sell it to them for $10,000. And again, this is a massive piece of property, but it was just in terrible shape. And the leaders at this community development organization cobbled together 8 different layers of funding, and only a very small percentage of it was private funding. This area was in a food desert. And so they found a funding partner that had specific funds allocated for, recruiting grocery stores to food deserts or for providing different opportunities. So that was a layer in their capital stack. They worked with the foundation that was very, keen on investing in low income areas. So really thinking about piecing together investment. Now, does it make it a little bit more complex, these investment deals with lots of different partners? Certainly, but it's so doable in communities where there are specific needs. And so this one, of course, Food Desert really allowed for some specific funding. Jeremy, you sat in a session about a project in Appalachia, which we've worked in extensively. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting session as well, especially since we spent a lot of time in Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia this past year, the group called Invest Appalachia. And they have been working for the past couple of years to really work with other funding agencies, other programs, so that they can, just like you were saying, Jen, piece these different funding opportunities together for a specific project. I think they had one example of a building renovation, a project that they had 16 different funding pieces to it, which I can't imagine how they manage all that, from tax credits to investment to grants, all these things. But they are trying to really put this together as a model that can work in other regions. So I thought that was really interesting, that their goal is to really share what they're doing and make it look achievable to other areas, because they felt like if it could work in rural Appalachia with all the challenges that face that region, it could work almost anywhere. So I was really inspired by that group. Another session I sat in was from Emporia, Kansas. And this was an example of, when we talk about grassroots, talk about action teams, volunteer groups. I think a lot of people think, oh, a volunteer group's got to do a litter cleanup or paint a mural, things like that. And those are definitely important. But depending on who those members are of that group, they may be able to achieve really impressive things right off the bat. A group in Emporia, Kansas that formed an investment group called Town Company 2, TC2. It was just a group of people that were interested in the downtown, really wanted to preserve the historic nature of the buildings. And so you had real estate agent, architect, people that had those types of skills that formed this investment group just to save their downtown. And their goals were to preserve and emphasize the historic nature of the buildings. They wanted to build a research and tell the story of these properties and get them renovated and activated again. And so that was one goal. Their other goal was not to lose money, which I think is always a good goal, but they weren't there to just maximize profit. They were there to activate the spaces, get them renovated. And so they were able to attract other investors from the community, pool their money and resources together, use the skills that they had, whether you're an architect or a real estate agent, whatever it is, whatever your skills are, to really make those projects work. And they've renovated several properties downtown. The Main Street director was there to be that resource to connect the dots to funding opportunities to other investors. Their Main Street office actually has an incubator space in it, which I thought was really interesting. So they're really trying to actively grow entrepreneurs there in their office. And they're able to connect those entrepreneurs with space as that business grows. And if they want to expand through this investment group that's renovating the spaces, they can help connect the dots for tenants. So I thought that was a really interesting session that I think would be doable in a lot of rural communities, a lot of small towns, if they can pull these different investors together to really make some of these projects pencil out and come to action.
And I think that's really an important takeaway that you mentioned, is that when you are working with foundations or nonprofits, they don't have the same expectations of an ROI as private investors. Of course, everyone wants to break even. Most private investors, though, are really seeking a substantial return. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're working with foundations, nonprofits, you mentioned they just don't want to lose money. That's the goal. It really reduces the pressure, and it allows you to kind of figure it out as you go along, which I think many Main Streets, that's how they find their success, is they jump into a project, they learn as they go. They may have some failures, but they learn from them, and then they can replicate this over and over again. And that's really what we heard a lot of really awesome success stories about, was just kind of learning through failure and continuing through their revitalization journey.
Yeah, one of the fun concepts that I've encountered is the idea of failing fast, right? Just get after it. You're going to learn on the fly. If you just keep sitting around in the planning phases forever, nothing happens.
That's right. And that's, we see that we've worked in the last 5 years, we've worked in almost 200 communities from coast to coast. And I think we get the question a lot when we're meeting with stakeholders, when we're meeting with city officials. They say, you probably haven't seen this before, have you? It's really bad here. And we say, you know what? Most of the challenges are similar across the country. And it is that, planning efforts have taken place. Plans are sitting on shelves. Community has some apathy from all of the visioning and the stakeholder input. They've given their input. They want to see action. And so our biggest goal, and I think our biggest success as well, when we have seen this process work, is getting those communities to take that first step of action. And just as we've talked about, it's not always going to be perfect. There may have been a better way to do it, but action is contagious. And when the community sees things happening, whether it's, people walking their dogs down the street, or moms pushing strollers, or whether it's a new mural or a painted crosswalk or music downtown or a fun event, it starts to create a buzz. People are craving that so much. They want a cool place to gather. And so just taking that initial step will create, the buzz that is necessary to continue feeding itself. And so that's our biggest charge often, is convincing communities to just take that first step, to not really be held in that purgatory of planning. And I think we know from our experience in our careers that that's what it takes. But it was really nice to hear so many examples of that same success in communities from 200 people to 200,000 people represented at this conference. And so we've left, I think, feeling really inspired, ready to hit the ground running with our existing clients, excited to meet with new potential clients. And, I have to say, we had the great opportunity of hosting a networking reception at our headquarters as the conference kicked off. And so it was a real treat for us to not only get to, learn and continue learning from our colleagues and from other communities in this space, but it was a real treat to get to showcase our headquarters in Birmingham, our wonderful team at Downtown Strategies and Retail Strategies. We called it kind of a friends and family event. Even though we had a lot of people that have never met us, there was definitely that feeling of, come together, let's learn from each other. So it was a real treat for our team and for Retail Strategies as a whole.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Boots on the Ground. We hope the insights and stories shared by Jenn and Jeremy have inspired you to think about the potential of your own downtown. Now, remember, whether you're revitalizing an old space or starting fresh, small incremental steps can lead to major impacts. So don't let the journey towards revitalization intimidate you. Downtown Strategies is here to guide you every step of the way with bite-sized plans that you can put into action. So, of course, if you are ready to take the next step, or you just want to learn more, about growing and engaging your downtown, please visit retailstrategies.com/downtown strategies. That's where you can learn more about our services. You can explore case studies and see the transformations that we've helped facilitate with communities all across the nation. Now, remember, the journey to revitalization starts with a single step. So, you can make that step count with Downtown Strategies. Until next time, keep your boots on the ground and your eyes on the horizon. Thanks for listening.